Okay, so before I introduce our speakers, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Jean. I'm going to be monitoring the chat and people who need to raise hands. I'm the Assistant Studio School Director at Abington Art Center, and I've been putting together a lot of the Zoom classes and things like that. If you're not familiar with me, hi, nice to meet you. So I just wanted to thank you all for coming, and we want to give a very special thanks to everybody who donated to Abington Art Center. We know everybody's in a different financial situation right now, so any little bit is amazing, but if you're incapable of donating, you can always just keep us in mind in the future when things get a little bit better. So for those of you unfamiliar with our coffee break artist talks, they're normally held on the second Saturday of every month, and they feature whatever our current exhibition is. So today's artist, Bill Brookover, and on Wyffels. It's in conjunction with our show that has to do with the American Color Print Society Member Spring Exhibition. You can't view it right now, but if you go to abingtonartcenter.org, we do have the exhibition catalog online. So, like I said, if you're not muted, please mute yourself. I will be opening up for questions, but let me introduce our first speaker. We're gonna have Bill speak, and then we're gonna have questions, and then we'll have Ron go. So our first speaker, Bill Brookover, is a printmaker and photographer whose work is based in his training in design and architecture. He serves on the board of directors at Fleischer Art Memorial and has taught printmaking there since 2010. He is a member of the Second State Press, the Print Society in Philadelphia in Liquid, the Mainline Art Center, and Philadelphia Center for Book and Da Vinci Art Alliance. So whenever you're ready, Bill, thank you very much. You can go ahead.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the chance to be here. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. If I can make that work. Huh. Second. It's first time sharing, so it's not, hold on. Stop sharing. I'm sorry for the technical glitch. I thought I knew what I was doing. There's me, hi. Just a minute. It's over there. We're going to get there in a second. There we go. All right. Okay. Oh, I'm going to close this. Okay. Can everyone see the screen? And I hope that's all you see. Okay. So I'm Bill Brookover. And I want to thank the Abington Art Center for inviting the American Color Print Society to show. It's a great opportunity for our group to show, and I'm going to be talking about my piece that's in the show. There we go. So this is the piece that I put in the show. I'm seeing faces on the right-hand side of my screen. Is everybody seeing the screen filled with the print? I hope. Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
First time screen sharing, so I hope it's working. So this is a screen print I did in 2019. It's called Majestic Collapsing. And last year I started a new body of work that I called Dissonance. So even before this pandemic shutdown, I was feeling stressed from accumulated decades of lots of changes and disruptions in our world. We're living through the digital revolution. Computers and smartphones and the internet are changing how everything is done. The global economy is changing the way businesses and industries function. Hopefully it will continue. And of course, looming on our horizon, climate change that we're already seeing effects of, that's going to create even more havoc than this pandemic. So I was feeling like I need to start expressing what I'm feeling about the world in my work, to reflect the sense of disorder and chaos, in short, dissonance. But that's not where I began my artistic life. I studied architecture in the late 60s and early 70s, and worked as an architect for many years. I love structure. I love order and geometry. I agree with Matisse that art should express the joy in life, and that's what humans are best at, finding beauty in the world. And I also really love the physical feel of materials. Now, I never became a weaver, but I'm always fascinated by the way threads go over and under, and I'm thinking about those kinds of things as I do my work. And about 5 years ago, I started making these layered collage pieces. This one is called Black Windows #1. It's pretty small. It's about 12 inches wide. And it combines a top layer, this frame that seems to cover everything, and it's floating about 1/4 inch above a lower layer, which is a monoprint I'd done in silkscreen a few years ago. And I was very happy to see that the size of the rectangles in my monoprint seemed to fit very nicely within the open cells of my grid. And I thought, oh, that's really nice. And as an architect, I love the idea of, oh my God, something's becoming spatial. So then I continued that process a little bit. And this one is called Rotating Triangles, Black and Red. See, I have trouble naming my pieces. They're kind of very prosaic. This is really what it is. They're triangles. It's a variation on this layered collage technique. This one's a little bit bigger. It's about 18 inches high and about 22 inches wide. Now the background is really controlling everything. This grid of rectangles with the alternating horizontal and vertical white and red stripes. The triangles fit neatly within the grid. There's two kinds of triangles. There's kind of pyramid shapes that are pointing up and down, and the pennant shapes that are pointing left and right. And there's a kind of a pattern to the way the triangles are looking. So if you look at the top row, the triangle's pointing up, then left, then down, then right. So then again, up, left, down, and right. Then the next layer, next row down, it shifts a little bit. So it looks like there's a pattern, but it's a little confusing. But if you look at these triangles from upper left to lower right, they all kind of line up. Pyramid, 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 pennant, 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 pennant. But then if you look from upper right to lower left, they're flipping. So the pennants are going left, right, left, right. So it creates this orderly, somewhat complex pattern that I really enjoy. Moving back to regular screen print, I really liked the depth that I was creating in the layered collage pieces. And so I wanted to figure out a way to create that sense of depth in my screen print work. I was in a show called Aberration. I didn't quite know what aberration meant, so I was Googling around and found this lovely pattern. It's actually a test pattern for looking for flaws in lenses. And the flaws in the lenses are called spherical aberration. So I decided that's the name of this series, and I've done it in a number of different colorways. So apparently, a lens, whether it's for a telescope or a camera or for our eyeglasses, the front and back surfaces of the lens are actually sections of spheres. And no matter how fine the processing is, apparently lenses mostly always have flaws. And so this test pattern is a way they look through the lens at this pattern and helps them figure out where the flaw is in the lens. I like the idea of that every lens has a flaw. Certainly as human beings, we all have flaws of some kind. And it had my grid and it had my triangles. So I actually did this in 4 separate tones of blue, going from very super transparent, pale blue through 4 tones of blue to super intensely saturated dark blue. And that helped create this sense of depth when you're looking at the piece. Plus, I also like the ambiguity of that some of the triangles are fully in focus and some are vaguely in focus. And it's like looking through kind of frosted glass at the upper and lower corners. Then in moving on, I decided to work with Collagraph plates. I did a little bit of collagraph printing, but really enjoyed bringing that technique into screen printing. So a collagraph plate is calligraphy is a combination of collage and printmaking, and so you can actually make a 3-dimensional printing plate, not highly dimensioned, like, 1/16 of an inch or so up and down. But the different layers, the different height, the upper part and the lower part catches the ink in different ways. One of the things I like doing in silkscreen is using a textured surface held up against the fabric and rubbing with crayons to create texture. So the one on the left that I call Layered Triangles number 11, burgundy and gold, it's really done with water-soluble crayons, rubbing on the screen, activating with transparent base or with inks, and then printing, and then like all monoprint processes, there's a ghost, you add a bit more information, you keep going. Each image then is a single one-of-a-kind work. Where on the right, I'd use that same collagraph plate to make a permanent screen, which are the black layer, which I could then do additions, and then also using the collagraph plate, printing over it in ink, and the raised portions of the plate take or don't take the ink in a differential way, so you get a kind of pattern. One thing I really loved about this collagraph plate was the play of positive and negative space. So if you focus on the blacks, you see all the triangles. But if you focus on the yellow, you see these kind of diamond shapes and then these strange angles thrown in. So again, I like the way it was creating these play of geometry. And these are all the same size. The collagraph plate is 11 by 17, so it's 17 inches high and 11 inches wide, and then that's printed on about a half sheet of printmaking paper. So in 2018, I decided it was time to push my work in several new directions. This piece is called Metamorphosis that I made with Bobby Adams, who I think is on the call. Hey, Bobby, thank you for pushing me in this new direction. So it's different than my other work in many dimensions. First of all, it's a woodcut, which I don't do very often. Actually had never done a major woodcut piece. It's a collaboration with Bobby, so that was new for me, and it's really big. It's 24 inches high by 48 inches wide, and there's no grid, which was really a new thing for me, although you see I do have some triangles. So Bobby and I were talking about maybe putting in a proposal to work with Big Ink. So they're a group that travels around the country. They have a very large printing press that folds up very small into the back of their van, and they spend the summer, normal summers, traveling from place to place and setting up workshops to do really big woodcut prints. So Bobby and I decided we would try this idea, and so her work is very flowing and organic, and of course mine is very geometric, but we decided to try to kind of mash up our visual languages. So we drew out our design on this large 2-foot by 4-foot sheet of plywood, and then cut it into 2 halves, so we could each have a piece to work on separately, and then we would get back together and compare how we were doing, and then switch blocks. So we each cut on both blocks. So it's really everything is a collaboration of 2 hands, although not 2 sets of hands holding the knife every time, but really trying to collaborate and pitching ideas back and forth. And I think it doesn't look like anything that either one of us had ever made before, but somehow it looks like each of us at the same time. So it's a very interesting process. I really enjoyed working that, and kudos to Bobby for pushing me in this new direction. So at this point, I was realizing that I could work in, I don't always have to have a tight grid and rigid geometry. And I was beginning to feel the craziness of our world. We'd had someone in the White House for a few years who was creating turmoil. So this set me up for my dissonance series. And this piece is called, it's a silkscreen again, it's called Serene Discord. It's a 3-color print that uses wood grain. I took a piece of plywood and cut away all the soft grain and left all the harder grain, and then made a series of prints from the texture that was left and made some screens from that. And you see I do have my rotating triangle pattern in there, so I'm still exploring the tension between something that's flowing and something that's more orderly. I also decided to try to give more expressive titles to my work. So everything in this series are 2-word titles, and they're expressing the opposites of how I feel. In the title is a positive and a negative energy in opposition. This piece is called Peaceful Transgression. You can see I'm still using the Collagraph Plate pattern of triangles. They're not quite as orderly as the rotating triangle pattern had been. Now it's floating over a layer of kind of soft gray that's kind of has some patchy, foggy areas in it. And then over the whole thing is this kind of eerie yellow cloud, yellow fog floating. This one is called Quiet Disunity. It's also a 3-color screen print. And I'm using really dynamic triangles printed as a red mesh texture, slicing through an atmosphere of green and yellow dystopian clouds. Magnificent Collision layers red chaotic pattern and crazy quilt road pattern over a faint triangular pattern. This one reminds me of aerial photographs, like flying over some crazy landscape. There's some Anguish with its black bars seeming to silence the red, white, and blue field beyond. Perhaps a metaphor for the disruption of our public discourse as our free press is labeled fake news. Happy Clash has 4 layers of color using unrecognizable patterns, almost camouflage type patterns in clashing colors. Here you see views of my studio. So for those of you who aren't familiar with silkscreen, it's variously called silkscreen or screen print. It's fabric stretched over a wooden frame, like you see in the left, and you block out parts of the fabric to leave open stencil areas that you push the ink through using a squeegee. So the screen is in a set of clamps that are hinged, so it can be raised up vertical or lowered down onto the board. Then we also use a clear sheet of Mylar for registration purposes. So the Mylar sheet is taped along the bottom edge of the board as a hinge. So you can print on the Mylar, then lift the Mylar up and slide the piece of paper under to get it positioned correctly where the image is, and then pull the Mylar out of the way, lower the screen, and pull the ink across. That's very helpful for registration when you have multiple layers that you can then keep everything lined up the way you want. In the middle, you see my work table, some proofs. There's the red triangle, pots of ink of different colors. And then on the right, you see I've got a pin wall that I can put things up on the wall to test, give a chance to look at them. Do they need another layer? Is it finished yet? And then as I'm putting a show together, I can start looking at how pieces fit together on the wall. And here's the show I was able to do last September at Da Vinci Art Alliance, titled Dissidence. So in addition to the visual dissonance in the work, I wanted to add another layer of visual noise to the gallery itself. So Bryant Gersh, who's our exhibitions director at Da Vinci, worked with me many extra hours, and we figured out a way to do these red squares that are on each row of squares is the same distance apart, but within the row, there's kind of a random chaos happening. So in addition to the work, there's kind of overall sense of visual noise, but also kind of joyful, like red and white happiness. So in the center, you see the 12 of the prints I made for this series, and we just pinned them up on the wall using magnets, so I didn't have to do a lot of extra framing. And then on the right, you can see the Metamorphosis woodblock piece, also hung the same way. And again, on the left, you see then the sense of how the red patterning kind of overwhelms the room. And then on the right, this is one of my favorite slides of my audience. So Da Vinci does a great program of working with neighborhood schools, bringing kids in to see when we have shows on display. So this is one of the classes that came to look, and it looks like the kids are all happily learning about art. So hopefully they will be my new audience as we move into the future. Hopefully there is a future. So thank you so much for listening, and let me know if you have any questions. So stop.
Thank you very much, Bill.
There we go.
Okay, so if anybody has any questions, you can either unmute. We got one over here from Bates.
Yeah, Ron, excuse me, Bill, your work is great. I'm also a budding screen printer. Like on those large triangles, how do you get the pattern inside of them? What technique are you using on the screen sort of to get the texture?
So because I trained in architecture decades ago, I actually learned drafting with pencil and paper and T-squares and triangles. So I do a lot of drawing things out on paper. And sometimes I actually do like a pen and ink drawing, and then I will either photograph that and transfer the image to the screen using the photo emulsion technique. So I don't know if you've...
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
So that's an incredibly flexible technique. You can do photographs. You can convert photographs into halftones, but any kind of graphic mark you can use to burn onto the screen, as long as the image that you're trying to burn is really black. You really need high contrast between the image and the background. So a black ink drawing on mylar or even on a white paper works okay. So that's one way I've transferred them. Sometimes I then will trace the marks onto the screen and then use drawing fluid. So there's another technique of getting images on screens, which is using drawing fluid and screen filler. So drawing fluid is material you apply with a thin brush. So, and when it dries, it stays water soluble. Then you can coat the rest of the screen with the red screen filler. That's what I had coated my screen with in that image where you saw the red. It's kind of like a glue and is not water soluble when it dries. So once the screen filler is dry, over the dried drawing fluid, you can now gently wash out the drawing fluid. Since it's water soluble, it falls away, and then you have the open stencil. So I do that if I want more of a hand-drawn look, because then there's like the lines aren't perfectly straight. They're a little bit wobbly because of my hand moving across the screen. So those are two different ways that I do it.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions?
Can I interject?
Absolutely.
Can you hear me? Hi everybody. My name is Paula Marciano. I am the director of the Brodsky Center at PAFA, and I'm very happy to see you all. I miss you all, of course. Bill, it's wonderful to see your work and to learn more about it. It's really outstanding. I thought your installation that you showed was a winning really exhibition, very, very interesting. I wanted to know if when you develop all your screens to make your screen prints, do you keep the screens? Do you create an archive and these tools for you to continuously reuse, or do you destroy them and redo them?
Well, if I had large enough space and enough money to continue to buy new screens, I would probably keep them on the screen. But I have about 6 or 8 screens, and I do keep the imagery because I'm working with this photographic technique. I like to, my preferred method now is actually to, even if I've done a hand drawing, to then scan it or photograph it and then have it created on a Mylar. So there's a company called eArc, E-ARC. They actually exist to support the architecture and engineering firms. So now all drawings are done in AutoCAD, and the files go straight to eArc, and they produce them onto paper to send, sets of prints out to builders to build buildings. But you can send them a graphic file. You can upload it to their site, and then next day go pick up a sheet of Mylar. So the Mylar is the same size as the ultimate image on the screen. I keep those Mylars. So I actually, in this project, I went back to some images that I'd used a few years ago, that crazy road system in the one print with the red. I'd actually used that in a print in 2012. So I feel like it's kind of best of both worlds. I can keep an archive of images and go back to them if I need to. But the way I work is to try to select like 6 to 8 images for this dissonance series, and then just start printing them. Actually, I started a lot of this work over a year ago. I took a screen printing class at PAFA with Lisa Hamilton, and started printing the gray version that I showed you. I actually did in the class with her. So I spent time just kind of printing the screens and seeing what they look like. Also, an advantage of having the Mylars is you can then lay the Mylar on top of another image that's printed in color. You can then lay a black and white Mylar on top of it because it's transparent. You can see how is this pattern going to interact with that pattern and try to imagine different colors. A lot of proofing and just kind of pushing around and see. I like to explore. I didn't start the series knowing where I was going to end up. I mean, I knew I wanted to create a body of work, but I didn't envision all the pieces ahead of time. I like to explore and see what will come out of the process.
This is so interesting. It's hugely interesting. And I am glad you're recording this, by the way. Are you going to post it? Because I want to listen to you again and grasp all of the things that you just said that are still very complex. I also wanted to really encourage you to go big. That installation that you did is very interesting, how you have the background and then your prints, but I wanted to see if you could you reverse that and really go big with your prints, and make the architectural component of your work really almost the driving concept, also in scale and in sort of how we as viewers are going to be working through your patterns that now are very contained. And so we have to, there is this very interesting, a very important aspect of printmaking that is intimacy, because printmaking, you always have to go very close. Yesterday, someone was asking me, how during the coronavirus era are you going to show prints, because people have to go too close to the print? So are you going to have a set of prints that you have to just refresh with every viewer? But are you going, so it would be interesting instead to see how in your case all of this dynamic can grow into space. But anyway, we can continue the conversation another day, but one.
Well, of course, going big requires more space, larger screens. The screens I'm using now are maybe as large as I can comfortably print by myself. I know there are more mechanized ways of printing that's still printing individual by hand, but you know, screens and presses, silkscreen presses that are where the screen is, where the squeegee is counterbalanced, and you can have assistance, or like they do at the workshop, of having two people pulling the squeegee from different sides of a table. I'm not quite there yet, so I thank you for your support. I'm certainly going to try to get there, and that gives me, so you know, it reinforces ideas that I've already been thinking about as I'm applying for different residencies and different working in different larger scale studios in the future. I'm not going to be out and about for a while, I think.
Bill, I have a question from the chat. Rosanna is wondering if you are creating art currently during the COVID quarantine, and if so, what's that like now?
I am not. I don't know. The first month I viewed it as like, well, we're like in a vacation cabin somewhere. We're off in a new place, and you know, you can't leave the house and everything's at home, and like, just kind of, okay, I'm getting used to sleeping late and relaxing and trying to avoid as much news as I can. I listen to some news, but I can't listen to it all the time. This program, and then I'm doing a similar thing on Wednesday at Da Vinci, at Fleischer from a distance. Fleischer is doing visits to studios. So I'm doing one of those Wednesday evening, and that's got me in the studio realizing, oh, I better tidy a little. So these things are getting me in the studio again, and I'm starting to think about making work. All those pieces on that wall, when I was doing the show at Da Vinci, I had some health issues the year before, and so I wasn't able to actually edition any of those pieces. So they're all what we technically call color proofs. They're not monoprints because I can edition them. I kept very careful notes of what ink I was using and what sequence and what layers. So actually that's something I want to get back to, is actually make some editions. Now I don't make really big editions. I guess because I'm still an emerging artist. There's not a demand for 20 or 50 of everything I do. So but I do like having multiples. It makes it easier to apply to different shows. And I like to keep one in my, quote, personal archive in case the others sell. So having just one of an image feels odd for printmaking. So I guess the next thing I want to do is continue. But that's not really responding to the current situation. I feel like it's hard to respond to it in real time. I think my work will probably respond more to this moment next year after I've had a chance to kind of process what the hell did we go through and where are we on the other side.
Are there any other questions? Thank you, Bill. No? Okay. I just want to mention for a moment that since we are recording this briefly, we will be offering this lecture online. So you'll be able to see it in case you missed anything, or if you'd like to review it. All right, so I am going to introduce our next speaker, Ron Wyffels. He instructs drawing and lithography at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. He is a critic in the BFA and certificate program. He also teaches courses in their continuing education department. His artwork is seen in exhibitions including Sterling Arts Gallery, Parkway Central Library, Art of the State, the gallery at Delaware County, and Villanova University, among others. Thank you very much, Ron. Whenever you're ready, you can go ahead. Oh, you're muted. Oh, there you go.
No, hi, Gene. Thank you very much, and hello everybody for joining us today. I have to say that doing all of this is quite a bit of a learning curve to me and has impacted heavily upon my teaching at the Academy. Which really points out that the teaching is it's a give and take, and there's a flow in both directions. So I have to say that in the classroom, a teacher is a student in the same class, whether you realize it or not. Okay, I'm going to share some images with you. Hold on. I apologize for the stumbling. This happens in the teaching too. Bear with me now. How much time do we have left?
Okay, there we go.
We've got another hour left at least.
Okay, well, I won't use all of that. Okay. I did not make this. I found it, and this has something to do with the nature of a lot of my art. I feel like things come to me, and then I work with them once I'm in contact with them. And this actually came about from something that I do instinctively. When I found this rock in Ireland while I was traveling. And I'm going to pose this question to most of you. When you go out into the woods, when you go out on a hike, and then return from the woods, before you get back into your car again, you'll notice that you're carrying something. And I think there's two kinds of people in the world. There's stick people and rock people. And when you come out of the woods, you'll find out which one you are, because you'll have one of those in your hand. And I'm definitely a rock, from the rock tribe. And so this stone actually came from the Ring of Kerry in Ireland. So this was when I was searching for prints to show that would somehow have a bearing on what it is that I do. And I think this is good that I'm doing this talk, because it helps me to put into word, or try to at least, in seeing what it is that I do. So in a way, I'm listening to myself as I'm speaking. This print is a lithograph, by the way, and there are two colors here. There's a black keystone printed, and then a chalky transparent flat printed over top of it to suppress the main gist of the image and allow these intruders, if you will, to somehow come to the forefront. And they don't really have any meaning for me. I think it's in their role and how they engage and relate to the surround that is of real interest to me. So I find myself oftentimes using things not for what they are, but for how they behave in the context of the print. In fact, if you're looking, this image here was taken from this room over here. Can you see my cursor moving? Okay. This image was taken from this room. See, there's the mirror with the reflections in it. a segment that somehow parallels this shape. So I can search and attempt to understand things. So it's more of a questioning process than stating things that I know. I'm going to show you these two. This print is related to another one. When I'm working on images, sometimes the process of doing them spans over a period of time, because this one here has 1, 2, 3, 4 different printing elements involved in it. And while I'm drawing them and putting the thing together, I get other ideas and of what to do with it. And then there's all the physical act of processing the stones and aluminum plates that encourages me to roll them up in black. And I say, well, that's, just for the process of it. Even if a color is going to be printed in a blue or a red, to process that stone, I roll it up and stabilize it with black ink first. And then I'm seeing it in another skin, so to speak. And then this gives me ideas to widen my scope of image making and push to making other prints. And so this one was a direct fallout of the last one, using some of the elements that were in there. Letting some of the, if I go back to that, the transparent gray in the background is essentially that. It's a backdrop of imagery that conforms to and aids in the establishment of the image. But then allowing that to be printed in a bold color pulls it into as a dominant factor in the work. So that essentially putting the cart ahead of the horse, if I could use that analogy, and allowing a whole different sequence and imagining of how the image is put together and how it behaves. Yes. Yeah, some things aren't meant to be understood, they're simply meant to be experienced. And I think I have that attitude when I'm making my art, that I can't find the why or the wherefore for things to enter into it. It's just that I know there's some subconscious or at least a visual reason for them being in there. And this is a photograph that I took over my head of my daughter Lindsay's cat that slipped in behind me on a chair. And I thought, well, this is a nice kind of relationship. It's about the relating of things. And the cat hadn't done that before. So there's a new meeting of two different concerns here. And I think oftentimes that I try to do that in my artwork, to bring things together that hadn't normally associated before. And my images, let's see, to talk about the sources where they come from, I collect ideas and forms from things I have seen, and I maybe just like the shape of something. So I'll capture that and then let that become the form of the image. Oftentimes I let ideas enter and tread upon or overpower other ideas that are in the work. And then change the orientation of it too. So the new orientation allows the image to move into its own direction. So, and I have to say, when I begin these things, I don't really know where they're going to go. I don't have a foreseen ideal expected outcome envisioned and then strive to reach that. When I begin a work, that's all I know. I just know enough information to get the thing off the ground and get it going. This is another image that came from this. And I talked about that before, how images can grow out of other images. So this has, you can't see it in here, or maybe very lightly in the background behind that murky yellow hiding under the white is this condition right here. But here it's printed in black. This is taking two of the elements from that print and letting them stand alone by themselves. So print what could have been like secondary or even tertiary support information in one print and letting it become the main issue in the work. So this is all printed in black, and then this is another transparent flat that was printed over this whole shape. And here it's printed in like a chalky, translucent color so that it suppresses the black and changes, so that there's a marked difference between this black and that black. And as far as the imaging goes, I think it could very much just be a love of the material and its behavior. This image was drawn using Xerox toner as a drawing material on an aluminum plate, combined with some traditional litho drawing materials pressed into it. And then the toner itself becomes a stand-in for the would-be image. And it protects the plate so it doesn't become desensitized with the etch and the creating of the non-image area. And for those who are lithographers in the group. And then later it's reserved so that it will take ink. This work doesn't have a title. It doesn't have, well, here, let me show you something else. This is something that, this is a notation I made right on the print itself. It says, develop something out here. See, and this is just something that occurred to me while I was working on this. It's something, it never did get developed out there, but that was a notion that I had while working on it. And these notions follow, they become very important to me. This is the beginning of a process for another print. I was doing a rainbow roll with a 10-inch diameter roller and rolling into the print that you can see, but right there I'm setting up, I mark out on the glass slab using a Sharpie and a ruler, measuring out ribbons where I could lay down the ink, and each of those little steps is the width of that 1-inch flexible blade putty knife that I'm using to aid in the feeding ink back into the system once it runs out. Because you lay out a beautiful rainbow and then you start pulling prints with it, and then the ink runs out, and then what are you going to do? So you have to have a breadcrumb trail, so to speak, that allows you to feed ink back into the system without disrupting it. And there's another look at it while it's being constructed. Laying the ink in and then rolling. This is the plate, and that you can see with those two colors were rolled together over this section of the image. And this is I have to say that I do, a lot of printmakers will think that I work in a backwards fashion. Meaning that, let me jump ahead to this. I draw the key image first, the black, and could stand alone. It could have all of its, everything that it needs to have, it has. But then I look at it and I think, well, I can like create different focus in the work and emphasis on certain elements by adding color into it. So then I come in and print color over it with translucent and even transparent colors or opaque colors. And so this, over top of this, there's a transparent yellow printed over the top of this to really pull the whole form together and give it a sense of bulk and unity. And if you could, and if someone were to ask me flat out, what's the figure doing in there? That would take me by surprise. That question would really take me by surprise, because that's not the focus of the work. One of the earlier ones had a vase of flowers in the background, also laid on its side to create like an escape from that orientation to move into a new direction in the work. And that's the title below, New Sense. So, and it has a double meaning, like new sense, meaning this is a new sense of order that I'm establishing here, one that I hadn't used or discovered before. But also that could be a nuisance in that it is pushing me into an area that maybe I can't explain it. In fact, I don't think I can. I don't think I can explain how this works out. But that's the transparent colors that are getting printed over top of the other. All right, this. We lithographers we pretty much keep our ear to the ground and looking for stones. And there's like a network that people will call you, and I'll call other people, and I'll say, well, I've heard that so-and-so has some stones if you're interested, and they'll do the same for me. And I got a batch of stones that had belonged to Erwin Hollander. And if that name is familiar, he is he was one of the first hammer printers from LA, eventually split from there, went to New York, set up his own shop, and worked with a lot of major artists. And he also worked with another printer named Fred Guinness, and they called their shop Hollander's Workshop. But in the title, the written title, there is not an apostrophe between Hollander and the S. So it's not possession, it's plural. So, and Erwin Hollander was a Hollander by name, and Fred Guinness was a Hollander by ancestry. He was from Holland. So they were the Hollanders. And this image, see, I have written on there with a pencil. It says John Cage Collaboration. This is one of the works that they had done. Cage had done this series of works called the Mushroom Book with Fred Guinness and Erwin Hollander. And Cage was the instigator of it. He did some of the drawings for the prints, but a lot of the prints were pretty much factual and carried a lot of knowledge responsibility with them. And images like this this was not drawn by John Cage. This is drawn by a botanical illustrator named Lois Long. And these images were quite, let's see if I could, yeah, here it is. This is the condition that it was in when it came to me. And it was all scraped and scarred, and I fell in love with it. And I wanted to resurrect it and bring it back to life. If I go back to this, you can see this stone had been stored for what I guesstimate to be somewhere around 44 years. This work was done in 1972. And it had been stored in a barn with other stones stacked with corrugated cardboard in between them. And this piece of corrugated cardboard that laid on top of this stone had some packing tape on the cardboard, which insulated the stone from the acidity of the cardboard, which had gotten wet. And over time, the acid in the cardboard had actually eaten away at the stone. So it was changing the shape of the stone and working into it. It was etching it. So, and as I rubbed my fingers across this area here, I could feel almost the ridges, like, you know, like the corduroy corrugation of it. And that was the image. I counter-etched that stone and drew into it. So I added two. I tried to be as faithful as possible to the original drawing to resurrect it as it had been. And the beauty of these drawings in the mushroom book by Lois Long is that they showed the full life of the critter, so to speak, where there would be like a large bouquet of the plant form in various stages of life, like the earlier younger ones, and then moving into the later stages, the elder mushrooms, and then there'd be a cross section of one in its prime, so you could see the detail of it. So these were actually scientific illustrations of the plant form. And in John Cage's book, they collaborated with another gentleman, a mycologist named Alexander Smith, who wrote some very learned descriptions and information about the mushrooms that were in the book as well. And then Erwin Hollander and Fred Guinness printed these. This is one of the prints that I drew, counter-etched it, added to it, drew into it. What I was really interested in, if you can see this texture. Oops. Right here. This was the effect of the acidic cardboard eating into the stone. And this just amazed me. And I thought, this is a very John Cagean kind of condition here, the evolution of the thing with nature as an actor in the process. And so, and you'll notice that I had titled this work the fifth collaborator. So I had thought that Cage was the first collaborator, Lois Long being the second. She was the illustrator, Alexander Smith, the knowledge behind it, and then Erwin Hollander and Fred Guinness being the fourth collaborators, because they printed the original ones. And then I had thought that I was the fifth collaborator because I was bringing it back into use again, but then suddenly realized that I wasn't, that nature itself had been drawing on the stone for 44 years, and it had been the fifth collaborator in this print. And this is also I took a piece of mylar. There's another process for using photo plates to overprint things. And if you take one of the prints and tape it down to a table, lay a piece of frosted mylar over, and then draw on it with a light stopping material. And then you can shoot that onto a photolitho plate and then print it and a transparency over it, which is what I did for this. So that plate was printed in this transparent, like almost like a soft stone color over top of the black image. And so I feel like in part creator and in part a participant in this lineage, in this process. This is the first state of an image that I had evolved through about 6 different states. And by that, I said when I'm working on things, I get inspired and get other ideas to do things to them. And so then I actually do. After I print it, I can come back and counter-etch the stone and redraw it, and then evolve it in a different direction. And this one is called Conjure. And it's, I'm very much in love with the, where are we here? Right here. With the texture and the workability of the surface of the stone. This is a natural buildup of crayon piling on top of crayon. And this to create like a really dark tone, and then rub it out, polish it back with steel wool, and then draw on top of it. I think that's in part for me. I'm in love with the process, so I like to get, while I'm making the drawing, I really like to make it. I like to get involved with that process. This is the same image. And I have to say, after seeing this one, it occurred to me that, oops, wait a minute. I felt that it had too much miska muska, if you know what I mean. You know, for the Musketeer fans in the group, the black shape felt like it had like a little too much meaning to it. And in my works, I've come to realize that I seem to try to stay away from specific identity meaning in things, to let them kind of tread on the outskirts of the knowing. So I covered this over and I called it the wrong idea because I felt like the other print was going in the wrong direction. So, and I was acknowledging that. So I just drew another a plate and then printed it in a graphite scribble on top of that. This is, you'll notice it, that, see, this stone does evolve, and this element on the right here, I literally became married to that element, and I kept it around in about 6 different states of this image. Just let it move along and come along, and so all of the activity kept changing this part of it. And the feed in, some of the recognizability of this, it looks like it could be an interior of a room or maybe it's a person. Those things are, in my way of thinking, formalized abstractions of pictures. I would like trace a photograph and then lay it and then trace it off onto the stone and then flip the thing at a right angle onto itself so that this element here, it comes here, and then trace it onto itself again and let it be an entanglement in its own self to lose its identity. And I can't explain this kind of activity, but I love doing it. I believe it's a consciousness. Then that was evolved into this condition. Platforms, abstractions of stairways, detail from that print. In the things that I abstract, I don't allow their original identity ownership to have too much control in my depiction or rendition of the image. In fact, somehow they appear to lose all of their original intent, as if to start somewhere and know that I'm going to go somewhere else. This, you can see underneath that piece of frosted mylar, there's a print that, well, this earlier one, this print. And then I drew with 6B graphite. You can see it shining in the lower area here. Graphite stops the light too. Some materials do it better than others. Graphite works real well if piled on. And then this was laid onto, after I finished this drawing, it was laid onto a photo plate and then shot onto the plate. And with the original idea that it was going to be a transparent color to join efforts with the key image. But then after seeing it by itself, I liked it, so I pulled a few prints of it like this. Because it seemed to push really heavily, especially this area here, into a realm that interests me, and that is the unknowing, or the separation of identity from a form. And that was printed on top of the other print. So I have 2 different editions here. One that has this, I have an edition of those prints, and an edition of these prints. Let me go back to something I could say about the drawing of that. Yeah, the original one, see this element right here was not as complex as it became. And so after etching stones for a while and maintaining the same image through etch and counter etch, it actually starts to stand up proud on the surface of the stone, so that it takes on a physical height to it. So the image becomes a plateau. And then as I draw on top of it and scrape on top of it, it takes on a whole different personality. So all of this is an adjustment of the image and how it physically sat in the stone. This is actually another state of that. I took the image and turned it so that this would be the top. Became a vertical image, which I usually don't do vertical images. I usually do horizontal ones, and I don't know why that is. I think I'm just more inclined, more attracted to horizontal pictures. Maybe it's because when I look at them, I can move my head back and forth like this and look at them, and that seems like more of a more pleasing activity to me than moving up and down and looking at it. And so this image has transparencies drawn on a photo plate and printed on top of it. What I was saying earlier, like a lot of printmakers, if they're doing a multicolor print, and if it has a black in it, the black is actually maybe drawn last and printed last, almost in the traditional 4-color process, where the yellow, red, blue precedes it. And I mean, I don't print that kind of full color printing sense, but I just print colors as I see them and as I like them. And the title here too, even allowing myself that escape route from the knowledge and the insistence on the identity of the objects, other than, meaning it's something else. I'm looking for something else, maybe something I don't fully understand. This one is called Forsaken Idea. And the drawing itself went through a lot of change. This element right here really was something, a fixed object. I'm not going to tell you what it was, but I was making an observational drawing of a form that was before me. And then as I kept working on the print, and I like the notion of the idea leaving itself behind and then moving on elsewhere. So with that said, I could not tell you what this is or what that is or what this is or what any of it is. It's just the flow of the direction of the making of this thing as it came about. And I titled it Forsaken Idea. This is actually one of the stones that is printed in this print. And I use other colors in them too. This is rolled up in black, but I think like this element and this element were printed in different colors. And all of this may have been printed in black in the image. Yeah. Okay, this is in the print shop at PAFA, using their electric tockage press. And the school has some pretty big stones there, but the stones that I have, that I work on are my own, that I use there, because I don't want to take stones away from the students. This is a black and white, well, straight stone drawing printed in black of the image that's in the show. And which is this one, and it's called Direct Descendant. So which again, in word, exhibits my my penchant for taking things and then having them move on to something else. If we go back to this is what the stone looked like by itself. And then after I pulled some prints of this, I took a couple of them. I always pull just a couple prints and then draw on them, make working proofs, so that I might take like a watercolor or pencil and just draw on top of them to further the interest of it. And again, in this one, I'm very much in, like all of this, the toys of the thinking, the different approaches to it. This is another abstraction of that same form. Yes, it was a chair. And then letting marks just become marks that have no real identity meaning other than just being themselves. And I don't know if you can tell from looking at the photograph of me, but I have, I wear trifocals. And I like most of my works, they're always about some aspect of seeing or something becoming visual. And that's what these notations are on the side here, like this kind of stuff, thinking of like, the optical realm of this image as opposed to that and that. Like this is -1, 0, and +1 to create the different levels of that. And of course, these the trifocals that I wear don't really do that, but in my imagination, I'm using that as an abstracting device for working on this element.
I have if I may interrupt, Ron, I have a question in the chat. Jenny is wondering, how did you create the texture of the chair seat and back?
Oh yeah. This. Let's take a look at that. One of the great beauties and things that I fell in love with immediately when I started making lithographs and evolved this, romance with the stone is that the way that the crayon attaches to it. There's a traditional manner of, and you can see it in a lot of other artists' work, like in Stowe Wangenroth's lithographs. You can see the buildup of the crayon, that classical pebbly look. And the way that is done is you start out with one of the harder litho pencils. Let's say that, and they are numbered, and the higher the number, the harder there is with the William Corns pencils. So that you would start by laying down a tonality with the hardest pencil, the number 5. And so it puts a small dot onto the stone. And then you take the next softer one, the number 4, and then proceed beyond that, 3, 2, 1. And draw with, this is something, it doesn't have anything to do with the grain and the texture of the stone. The stone, by the way, had a 240 grain on it, which is pretty fine. And so the way the material piles up on it is due to the material sticking to itself when you apply the fat over the lean, or the softer material on top of the harder material. And it piles up to that. Actually, I went further than, starting with a base of 5, then going to 4, 3, 2, 1, and then I went to 0 and went to 00. So areas like this and here, this had so much drawing material piled up on it, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, even 00 crayon. And the 0 and 00 crayons are so soft that they don't even put them in pencil form because you wouldn't be able to keep a point on them. They're like a gooey Conti crayon. And when it piles up on top of the other crayon, it gives that almost like a orange peel or pigskin football texture that has like, if you were to pull your fingers across the surface of the stone, you can actually feel the crayon piled up on the surface. And then, of course, because there's so much crayon there, it would take a fiercely strong edge. Okay. This area again, I think in most of my prints I like filling in with crayon like a whole tonality, almost solid. Just scribble the thing solid and then take steel wool and just polish it back so it reveals the texture and buildup of that crayon on the stone. And then the amount of crayon that's left on the stone becomes the image. And when I do that, I use usually start out with a really hard crayon because it's not very greasy. It doesn't have a lot of grip or penetration into the stone when I draw on it. So it stays pretty close to the surface. And then when I steel wool it away, it comes away fairly easily. And because it is made out of that hardest material, I can draw on top of it with any of the others. Meaning that if I had drawn that with a number 1 crayon, I wouldn't be able to draw on top of it with a number 4 because the number 4 is harder and it won't stick to a number 1. because of the viscosity differences. I find meaning in these kind of elements. Let me go back to here. Like this kind of stuff. And this happens, it's a peripheral activity that happens while I'm working on this drawing. I'll be drawing on this for a while, then I'll come down here and draw something else. I just pile some crayon on there and then scrape it back with a razor blade. Well, it actually works like this. This is a drawing of that process, of how that happens. This is the grain of the stone. That's the material piled on. This is the blade scraping through and leaving remnants in the valley. So it's a combination of drawing on the hill and in the valley. Okay. And then came back, and in my further attempt to move away from its chairness, use color to separate, and then printed these elements on top of it. And they don't have any meaning, they have visual meaning. So, and that's what it comes down to, is like it's an array of thought and visual act. And that, whoops, okay. That's my last image. I was going to come up with, I was trying to find something in my phone photographs to put on here to be some cute thing, but I kept showing it to my family members and they said, no, don't do that. That's too hokey. So anyway, here we are. So if anyone has any questions, and if those questions require returning to any of these images, I'll be happy to do that.
Ron.
Yeah.
It's Paula. Well, thank you for this. It's so wonderful to have this opportunity to get into your work. I don't know if I have a question, but I just want to say it's interesting how, for me, it's you're very demanding of your viewer in a good way. Because as viewers, we have to constantly move through these. You pack a lot in your prints, in your images, and then also there is this constant move between being very engaging, as you said, experientially, but overall your approach is very conceptual. And so as viewers, we have to be enamored with the work and then step away and think about it constantly. Perhaps the question is, where does that approach come from in your evolution, or is there how did you come to this process of creating an image and working with the viewer? Who was perhaps your inspiration, and how did you get there?
Yeah, I think mostly it's something that has come about through not really by chance, but by having it to be the next thing to do to it. You know, you're in a place and then there's another place to go from there. And I don't always apply a lot of logic to that. It could be, I think some of my ideas are better than other ones, but I'm always seeking to show them off in the best way that I possibly can, so that there's visual interest, you know, because there's always two goals there. There's the head stuff, and then there's the eye stuff. And for me, of late, in these things, the head stuff still holds a lot of questions. And but I want the eye stuff to maintain and carry the interest so that the head stuff can continue. I feel like in my own work, I'm not trying to make something that I'm making it firstly for myself, and I suppose that could be considered a selfish act, and I guess it is, but I feel like I'm talking to myself when I'm doing these things. And then if anyone else can eavesdrop on my conversation and listen in and get anything out of it, then great.
I have 2 questions in the chat for you, Ron. First comes from Larry and Rosanna.
Are those stones that wear, so it's very, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. So the question from Larry and Rosanna is, tell us about the variety of stone you work with. I love your notations on the work. Do you work on one piece at a time or a few?
Well, I answered the second one first because it's the easier one to ask. Yeah, I usually do. I usually work on one thing because when my head is involved with it, I just keep going with that. I can't like work on one thing and then go work on something else and then come back. It's usually one thing at a time. And because that's a real struggle there to kind of to meet the thing and engage with it and then to move it on through the process. And if I let other things, the whole things to begin with are about infiltration of other ideas, you know, idea contamination, ideas overpowering other ideas. And if I allow too much of that to happen, then I will kind of lose my footing. The other question, tell us about the variety of stone you work with. Well, it's all Bavarian limestone. They're all from, I believe, from the wellspring of the richest printable limestone deposit in the world, the Solnhofen quarry in Munich, Germany. And most of the stones used for printing come from there. And they still are quarrying stones too.
All right. Thank you. So I'm going to read this question in the chat from Dory Miller, and then I'm going to get to Carol. Dory is asking, can you go back to the process in the beginning of the presentation, the rainbow roll, how you loaded up the ink in advance? Can you detail how you did that? I guess what I'm asking is, once pulling prints, it was hard to see how you reloaded the ink mid-process.
Okay. We'll have to go back to the images to do that, I think. So I'm going to share the screen again. And then we'll scan down. Okay, there it is.
No.
Whoops. Oh no. My bad. Sorry. Where is it? There we go. Okay. It's a logical system. The way the ink is laid out is a logical system. There's a map charted out that allows the inks to blend, and you can see where the steps overlap. And I'm using like 4 bands there, so that when all 4 are in use, that's 100%. When 3 are in use, that's 75, 50, 25, the bottom one. And so by the dovetailing of that pattern for color A with color B, you can see how those things mesh together. I keep them apart from each other so to aid in the ease of applying the ink. So I'm not trying to lay one ink right on top of the other. I would always put color A in the top part and then color B in the lower part. And if you look at how they are going to coincide, there's that band about 3 inches in from the edge that looks to be about 4 or 5 inches wide. And it does that gradient of, after it moves beyond the 100% of color A, it moves into like 75% color A, 25% color B, then moves to 50% color A, 50% color B, and then reduces to 25% color A, 75% color B, so that they will blend. And then when I run the roller in this direction, roll it out. And in doing a rainbow roll, you have to be really careful. See this little gap right here? That's the allowance for variation. And so I'm always mindful of the edge of the roller, because I run it up there, and you have to let it drift a little bit back and forth, so that the differences in these areas are blended more or less, so that they're not, not very crisp, so that you get a smooth transition. And so, but if I jump outside of that and roll bigger, or roll on a diagonal across here, I'm going to mess it up. So it's a really mechanical process for rolling it out that way. And this is what was yielded. So I take the roller and roll it across this way. See, and there's where color A moves out, then blends into color B, and then this is color B.
Thank you, Ron.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, you can see it on the roller there.
Carol has been waiting very patiently. So do you have a question, Carol?
Yes.
Mhm.
Emotions seem to play a big role, at least to me as a viewer. I'm wondering if you could address that a little bit.
Address the what? I'm sorry.
Emotions seem to play a big role in your work, at least to me as a viewer. And I'm just wondering if you could address that, how emotions play a role in your work.
Yeah. I think that it's, well, emotions are feelings. And so, yeah, a lot of the things that I deal with in my work are based on feelings. So, and I can't question them. And oftentimes I can't understand them. So it's, I think when I'm making the thing to keep it alive for myself, I have to stoke the fire a bit, so that it maintains my interest. And I don't have a lot of demands on holding my attention. I can get involved in the simplest of things and get a lot out of them. So all I can say is that yes, there is an emotional attachment to it. And you've probably heard me use words of like romance and love and being and commitment of some kind. And these all sound like human emotions, but they are. It's like I feel like I know these stones. Don't think me weird now.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions for Ron? Okay. I do have one comment in the chat. Excellent presentation, Ron. We are very engaged in your world. That's from Stephanie.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Stephanie.
Oh, I have one more question. Okay, I've got Lauren Rosanna. Are you creating art currently during the COVID situation?
This is something I could tell you a lie. I could say, oh yeah, life is wonderful, and and all that, and you'd say, oh, that's a lot of BS. And it would be, because I have to say that my life is just as jumbled and screwed up as yours. So if you can take any consolation in that, I hope you will. Of late, I've been making very little art. I've been doing some drawings, and definitely not making lithographs right now. And I'm chomping at the bits, and have these conversations with myself where I say, I'm never going to take that for granted. Once I get back in there, I mean, the love will be as strong as ever for that. And yeah, it made me, in fact, well, I don't even want to go there. I can tell you some of the fears that I had about the coronavirus and how it would have like a lasting impact on me. I don't want to go there. That's depressing talk.
I have a question. It's Rona. Yeah. When you do a variation, on your print, like the last one you showed. Are you working on the same stone, or are you using an additional stone and overprinting?
What I've, yeah, that's a good question, Rona. There's what I do is mostly what I do is I'll draw a key image on a stone because I really love the way that the stone interacts, you know, with my physical drawing, positive and subtractive, working on the stone, and it's just a total joy. And then after I pull a proof of it, well, I have in some cases drawn other stones to go back with it, but there's a process that can be much easier, and it could be a modern process where, and I showed you where I take a Mylar and lay it over top of one of the prints and then draw on the Mylar with a 6B pencil. And then put T marks on the Mylar too, so it's all in lockstep registration with the print, and then take that piece of Mylar, lay it face to face, you know, emulsion to emulsion on a photo plate, and burn the image into a plate and then print it. And this is very quick too, because with stones, and this is not a discredit to stones because I'll always use stones. If you roll up an image on a stone, if you etch an image in the stone, you really do have to roll it up and find out what you've got, and then lock it into a form for printing. And this is all done with a leather roller and black ink. And then, so you see everything, every image, even if it's intended to be printed in a color, you always see it rolled up in black first, just to stabilize the thing. And then later you would remove the black ink and then print it in color. But with the photo plates, you don't have to do any of that. They're just a straightforward thing where you just shoot the image and then throw the thing on the press, you know, well, you etch it, and then throw the thing on the press, and then just go right into the color. Roll it right on there. So it's really good for printing light, easily contaminatable colors like yellows and whites and softer colors, because you don't have to, you know, pollute the image with black and then struggle to remove it.
All right, thank you. I do have a question from Bill. He's wondering if you have access to PAFA and their printmaking facilities at the moment.
You mean, can I get in there and make prints?
Yeah, I believe that's the question.
No. There's, well, like in any other walk of life, you know, our true love tempts us to move in that direction, and that would be, you know, for the sake of social distancing and protecting myself and protecting others, we just don't mess with that because things will get contaminated. So nobody's going into that building. The building is closed. I have a drawing that I've been making on a stone in my studio there, and it's sitting right there with the little pencils right next to it, just as I left it, waiting for me to come back.
Right, yeah, that's understandable, and that obviously is very important to make sure that, you know, nobody gets infected by going into buildings that aren't essential. Thank you. Is anybody else? Dory says she misses PAFA as well.
Oh yes.
Does anybody else have any questions for Ron or even Bill? No? Okay. Nope. Okay. Well, I just wanted to take one more chance to thank both of our speakers, both Ron and Bill today. This is really great. This is our first artist talk. So thank you so much. Jenny says thank you. And thank you to all of you for coming. Hi, Greg.
Nice. Wait, I want to do something here. Bill, high five right there.
Good job.
Okay. All right. Okay.
I like it. Okay. So thank you all for coming. If you would like to be in the know if Abington Arts Center is going to have any more artist talks, please subscribe to our newsletter, which you can do by going to our website, abingtonartcenter.org, and clicking on the little envelope button in the lower right-hand corner. You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook. All right, well, everybody have a great rest of your weekend. Thank you so much for coming. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.